Hi, it's Katrina. The alchemical door of Rivodutri. In the small Italian village of Rivodutri, most of everything was destroyed in a devastating earthquake that took place in 1948. But there was one curious architectural element that remained standing when everything else was shattered. It's called the alchemical door, and it's nothing short of bizarre. The portal, because that's really what it looks like these days, was originally located in the Camiciotti Palazzo, but now stands guard in front of a small memorial park. It was created in the 17th century, with one side of the door decorated in strange carvings and symbols that are supposed to represent the idea of the great transmutation. If you're not sure what transmutation is, let me quickly explain. Ancient alchemists believed one material could be transmuted or changed into a different material, usually worthless metal, into precious gold. Alchemists were convinced that if they had the right formula, they could transform any ordinary metal into gold and therefore get stinking rich. But instead of displaying the formula for how to turn metal into gold, experts believe this doorway was decorated with symbols meant to represent the transmutation of the soul into a state of awareness. It's all quite confusing, especially when you look at the actual symbols that are on the door. There are pagan symbols, Christian symbols, Kabbalistic and alchemical symbols, all of them arranged in such a way that scholars have never been able to decode it. Nobody knows if the door is supposed to be read from the bottom or the top. All we really know is that the 17th century was a time when the nobility of Europe were deeply involved with alchemical practices. It was a weird merger between science and magic, secrets of biology, and esoteric knowledge. The alchemical doorway of Rivodutri is one of the very last pieces of this mysterious time in history, still standing. The Fairy Door. Ben Bulben is a fascinating place in Ireland. It's a rock formation shaped like a jaw in County Sligo. It's a massive piece of rock that was formed during the Ice Age by moving glaciers and almost looks like a wave of limestone and mudstone. And because of its unique appearance, it has been the site of a lot of Irish myths. One of the legends has something to do with a fairy door. Most people probably don't believe in fairies these days, but until recently the Irish certainly did. Not only did they believe that fairies were real, but they also believed that there was one place to see them in the human realm, at Ben Bulben. It was here where the Irish said there was a literal fairy door, a huge black scorch mark on the northern face of the rock formation that looks exactly like a door. It was said the fairy door would open on occasion, and that fairies would slip out into the human world to frolic before going back through the door and closing it behind them. It was very similar to the beliefs the Irish had about the Samhain festival, or maybe the original Halloween. There were certain times and certain places in Ireland where the doorways between the worlds would open and humans could interact with spirits. At Ben Bulben, they believed there was a door that allowed them to interact with fairies. Any Irish people out there, please let us know if this is true in the comments below. The Roman portal to hell. There is a doorway in modern Turkey that if you were to walk through it, you would end up dead. Thousands of years ago in the world of ancient Greece, it was considered a literal gateway to the depths of hell. Anyone who got too close to the doorway would die, and anyone who wandered through it was never seen again. It was so convincingly evil and obviously dangerous that nobody in the ancient world had any doubt it led directly down to Hades. In fact, it became a great place of sacrifice and ritual. Priests learned exactly how close they could stand to the doors without dying, and they would sacrifice animals to the lord of the underworld Hades in the days of the Greeks, and then Pluto in the days of the Romans. This is not a legend, and it is not made up. It's 100% true. The fact is that the Roman doorway to hell is actually a man-made gateway to an underground cavern with significant levels of carbon dioxide. The gas slips out from the cavern in high concentrations at night and in the early morning, then dissipates during the day. You can still see the poisonous gas within the cavern coming out in hot mists. Thanks to science, we know it's just geothermal activity from the earth. But to the ancients, it was the toxic breath of the hounds of hell. The doorway in King Tut's tomb. There is a strange doorway in King Tut's tomb that experts believe may lead to a totally unexplored burial chamber. In fact, Egyptian and foreign archaeologists alike believe the chamber beyond the doorway could lead to the mummy of Queen Nefertiti. The western and northern walls of the tomb of Tutankhamun may hide burial chambers, according to a bunch of different sources, including the Egyptian State Press and archaeologist Nicholas Reeves. Reeves believes the tomb of Tutankhamun, the famous boy pharaoh from the 18th dynasty, had 2 doors plastered and then painted over. His theory is that the doorways and the entire tomb was built for Nefertiti and not for Tutankhamun. The beautiful Nefertiti was the wife of one of the most infamous pharaohs, Akhenaten, and it's believed that he fathered Tutankhamun with a different woman. And while the family history of the pharaohs is extremely confusing, so too is the tomb itself. The issue is that archaeologists can't simply bust through the walls of one of the most important tombs in the world on a hunch. It's just not feasible. It may have been pillaged after it was originally found in 1922 by Howard Carter, but it can't be destroyed today. At least not until we have overwhelming evidence that the lines in the stone are in fact the lines of doors, and that beyond them are even greater lost treasures. What do you think could be hiding on the other side of the walls of King Tut's tomb? Let me know your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before you go. The skin door. The oldest door in Britain is about 950 years old and was once believed to be covered in human flesh. According to archaeologists, the oak door in Westminster Abbey was put in its current position sometime in the 1050s during the reign of Edward the Confessor, the very man who founded the abbey. This makes it the only surviving Anglo-Saxon door anywhere in Britain. It's an astounding piece of history, but it's also pretty disturbing. Initial tests on fragments of the door show that it was made of skin. However, a spokeswoman for the abbey said it was cowhide, not human hide. The thing is that there's been a legend attached to this door for centuries that says it was originally bound in the skin of a punished man. The person from the Middle Ages had been caught committing sacrilege. They were flayed, their skin was peeled off of them, and then it was nailed to the door to deter others from committing sacrilege. As interesting of a legend as that is, the tests show the door was actually bound in ordinary cow leather. Sorry to disappoint. The door was made from a single tree, and it's over 6.5 feet wide. It opens directly into the chapter house where monks used to meet for their daily prayers in the 13th century. Experts have known this door was old for a long time just by looking at it, but it's only recently that they figured out just how old it was. Aramu Muru. Aramu Muru is either an abandoned construction project or a magical doorway to another dimension. I don't think it's both. This place is located on Lake Titicaca, very near to the border with Bolivia. It was originally found in the 1990s when a mountaineering guide came across it in the Peruvian countryside. He found it curious because it appeared to be the wall of some great structure, a completely flat surface with a small door-like alcove in the center. The flat stone is around 23 feet and the doorway is just over 6.5 feet. Nobody can say for certain what the purpose of the doorway ever was. Archaeologists say it could have been an architectural flourish, part of an incomplete Inca construction project, but at the same time, locals believe the doorway once held great power. They actually call it Puerta de Ayumarca, which translates to the Gate of the Gods. There are stories about people vanishing through the doorway, strange lights coming from it in the night, and even tall, inhuman creatures slipping through the frame as if from another dimension. So either somebody built this very specifically to be a portal several thousand years ago, or it's the entrance to a building that never got finished. The Lion Gate. The Lion Gate is an ancient doorway in Greece to what was once the fortified citadel of Mycenae. The doorway is about 10 feet wide and 10 feet high, guarded by 2 huge lion sculptures above its top beam. Just beyond the door is a small alcove where archaeologists believe the guards once kept a small pack of dogs to alert them of any intruders. Thousands of years ago, there was a huge wooden door in the entrance, locked from the inside with a wooden bar. The gateway was erected sometime in the 13th century BC and is the only surviving monumental piece of architecture from the prehistoric Aegean. It would have been the very first thing someone saw when they approached the walls of the city. This was the home of the Mycenaean people, a Bronze Age city-state that lasted until about 3,000 years ago. The city sheltered beyond the Lion Gate was home to one of the most important Greek civilizations of the time. It was a major military stronghold that had control over most of southern Greece. The city itself had a population of around 30,000 people, but by the year 1200 BC, earthquakes and invasions had brought the city-state down on its head. All these years later, the only thing left of them are a few broken ruins and the Lion Gate, the only major piece of their civilization still standing. The tomb in the mountain. Just a short drive from the small city of Çorum in Turkey, there is a great mountain valley, and on the face of one of these mountains is a mysterious rock doorway that leads to nowhere. Almost nothing is known about this strange site, other than that it was most likely made in the 2nd century BC. Locals call it the Tomb of Kapilikaya, yet nobody was ever found buried here. There is a short staircase leading directly up the mountainside to the enormous hanging door of the tomb, but the door doesn't swing open. It doesn't actually move at all. There are gaps on the sides that you can walk around to enter the tomb, which is just a single spacious chamber. The actual grave is nothing but a small black niche in the back of the chamber with an inscription above the entrance, but nobody knows what the inscription means or who was ever buried here. There are no guards standing out front to keep visitors from creeping inside and damaging the place, so it's covered in graffiti. There is no actual road to get you here either. It's one of the most bizarre and forgotten archaeological sites in Turkey. Just a huge door once meant to guard someone's tomb over 2,000 years ago. Egyptian doors to the afterlife. In tombs throughout ancient Egypt, there are strange doors carved into the walls behind where people were laid to mummify in their coffins. These false doors are really just artistic representations of doors, either carved or painted. They don't actually open, but they were extremely important to the ancient Egyptians. The false doors that you see in all the most important tombs throughout the kingdom were thought of as doors to the afterlife. Each door was carved from a single piece of stone or a large plank of wood. At the center of the door was a flat niche with fake door jambs arranged around it to give it the illusion of depth. It was the closest the Egyptians could get to creating a functioning portal to the beyond. To the Egyptians, carving a false door in a tomb created a threshold between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It allowed the spirit of the deceased to enter and exit at their leisure, passing from the physical world into the afterlife at whim. It was an extremely important architectural design inside a tomb, because without it, the spirit had no logical way of reaching the afterlife. False doors were also placed inside offering chapels. In offering chapels, family members could come and pay their respects to their dead loved ones. They would place offerings on a stone slab in front of the fake door, for the dead soul to come pick it up later. Portals to the dead. Viking homes were very interesting and are something you don't really see shown much in the wildly popular Viking TV shows these days. We see Viking warriors and obscure political drama, but not much of the ordinary Viking home life. The truth is that the Viking house was an important place for families and for the dead. There's enough archaeological evidence for the experts to say beyond any doubt that the dead had a major presence in houses all throughout the Viking Age. Human bones were frequently embedded in the foundations of houses, with young infants being buried directly underneath the hearths. But the most meaningful place to bury a person was underneath the threshold of a house, right beneath the doorway. Different parts of the home served as different points of contact between those living in it and those buried underneath it. Some women were said to be able to actually see into either the future or into another realm if they were lifted above the front door. The Vikings believed there was power in putting bones in the threshold, and that those with the gift could use this power to create a sort of portal to the other world.
Down the rabbit hole. In the United Kingdom, a rabbit hole, yes, a seemingly ordinary rabbit hole, led to the discovery of a secret underground sanctuary. This sanctuary appears to have mysterious links to the Knights Templar. This place looks like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie. The Cainton Caves network, as they've been named, were found hidden underneath a farmer's field in Shropshire. The caves are so well hidden that when photographer Michael Scott went to take pictures of the site, he could barely find them. The network is beneath the surface of the field, completely invisible unless you know exactly where the tiny entrance is. But once inside, it's a totally new world. There are walkways, carved niches, and chambers where people lived, or at least visited 700 years ago. Not to mention, the place is full of spiders. The Knights Templar were a military order put together to protect Christian pilgrims visiting Jerusalem in the 12th century. They grew to have much economic and political sway in medieval Europe, then were wiped out by the angry French king Philip IV in 1307. While the Templars have not been officially connected to the underground network, many believe they were carved by their followers. The Templars were extremely popular, and it wasn't unusual for devout Christians to gather for underground religious ceremonies. Christianity wasn't exactly practiced in the 13th century the way it is now. But the truth is that we don't know what the caves were used for, who carved them, or why they were forgotten for so long. Do you have any theories? Let me know in the comments. A surprise mummy. Police in Peru recently found a mummified human from 800 years ago. The crazy part is that the police seized the mummified human from a food delivery man who had been keeping it in his house for 30 years. The mummy was stashed in the same isothermal bag that the man used for food deliveries. It was essentially in a pizza box, the thing used to keep food warm as it travels from the restaurant to the customer's house. But wait, this story gets even crazier. The man with the mummy was Julio Cesar Bermejo, and last we heard, he's still in police custody. He told local media that the mummy was his spiritual girlfriend. He even had a name for her, Juanita, and claimed that she slept in his room, sometimes even in his bed. Julio kept a preserved person's corpse, someone who died around 1200 AD, in his bed like a plastic girlfriend. But here's the big question. Where in the world did a 26-year-old delivery man get an ancient mummy? Julio said his father brought it home nearly 3 decades ago from somewhere unknown. The Ministry of Culture in Peru says the relic likely came from the Peruvian Andes over 800 miles away. They also confirmed the mummy is that of a man who was 45 years old when he died. The body was wrapped in bandages, presumably buried, and then pillaged by somebody. Through some bizarre twist of fate, the mummy wound up in a cooler and classified as a woman. Shipwrecks under the Golden Gate Bridge. In 2014, a team of researchers with NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, used their resources to search for hidden treasures near the coast of San Francisco. Specifically, they wanted to look at the strait of water around the Golden Gate Bridge, near Alcatraz. The depth near the famous prison island is about 100 feet, and then it goes down to about 300 feet closer to the bridge. They started their research by taking sonar scans of the area, and while the researchers were already fully aware that this particular body of water has a lengthy maritime history, they never imagined the scope of what they would find. There are a lot more sunken shipwrecks identified under the Golden Gate Bridge than anyone had anticipated. This area is one of the most important American ports on the Pacific coast, and it has been for hundreds of years. Researchers knew they would find some treasure, but they didn't realize they would find such a staggering number of shipwrecks. Throughout their investigation, the team with NOAA was able to discover the clipper called Noonday. It sank on its 4th voyage in 1863 after hitting a rock. They also found the SS Selja, a huge steam freighter that sank on November 22, 1910. It collided with the USS Beaver and went down like a stone. The team even discovered the USS Conestoga, the wreckage of a tugboat that vanished without a trace in 1921. These boats only scratched the surface of what was discovered. Researchers couldn't believe how many ships they found on the sonar. There are so many shipwrecks off the coast of San Francisco, it will take years for scientists to sort them all out. Who knows how many unexpected discoveries they'll make then? It's shout-out time! I wanted to say a big thank you to Andrew Fetterolf and Bjorn Damrong for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. Surprises in Old Jerusalem. Jerusalem has to be the only place in the world where a simple elevator installation can turn into an archaeological bombshell. Archaeologists working with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem uncovered a 1st century villa and a ritual bath during the construction of an elevator. The whole purpose of the elevator was to allow disabled people to have easier access to the Western Wall. But before it could be installed, they had to make sure there was nothing ancient on the building site. The Western Wall is the holiest site in the world for Jews, so it's no surprise an elevator a few feet away revealed secrets of the ancient past. The villa is 2,000 years old. Nobody knows who lived in it, only that it was built at the edge of where Jewish temples stood during biblical times. The ritual bath was a private one, likely used by the owner of the villa and their guests. The villa was likely occupied during the Roman invasion of 79 AD, perhaps even destroyed along with the original temple. Letter written by King Charles. As a couple living in England cleaned out their attic during Christmas break in 2022, they found a shocking piece of history. They uncovered a childhood letter written by the current King Charles to his grandmother. The king wrote the letter when he was just 6 years old. It reads on one side, "Dear Granny, I'm sorry that you are ill. I hope you will be better soon." On the other side, it reads, "Lots of love from Charles." The letter is also written on official notepaper from Buckingham Palace, dated March 15, 1955. It was written nearly 70 years ago. So what in the world was it doing in a random family's attic? According to the couple who found it, they were gobsmacked by the discovery. It's believed the letter belonged to one of their great-grandfathers, who had worked for the Metropolitan Police and been part of the Queen's protection force in the 1950s. Still, nobody knows how he managed to secure a letter written by the young king, nor how it got lost in the attic for nearly a century. If you're wondering who King Charles's granny was, that would be the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, mother of Queen Elizabeth II. Accidental circumnavigation. On September 6, 1522, the very first known circumnavigation of the world was completed with help from Ferdinand Magellan. What a lot of people don't know is that the circumnavigation was an accident. Magellan never meant to sail around the globe. He was looking for a faster way to reach the Maluku Islands of Indonesia, where extremely valuable spices could be procured. This was a time when spices were some of the most important commodities in the world. People paid incredible amounts of money for pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger. Things that are so ordinary for us today, available down the road at any store, were worth more than their weight in gold in the 16th century. In 1519, Magellan set sail with 5 ships. By the time the Armada circled the globe and made it back to Spain, there was only 1 ship left. Out of the original 270 crew members, there were only 18 people on board the surviving ship, the Nao Victoria. Ferdinand Magellan wasn't even on board because he was killed by a poison arrow after a skirmish with locals on the island of Mactan in the Philippines. Juan Sebastián Elcano had taken over as captain and was the one who completed the first global circumnavigation. The whole thing was an accident, made possible only because Magellan got lost and couldn't figure out how to get back home. This was how the majority of Europeans found out the world is a sphere, an ancient pendant. An amateur metal detectorist stumbled upon the find of a lifetime. Charlie Clark, a local cafe owner in Birmingham, was wandering through his friend's field in 2019. His dog had just died, and Charlie was upset. He thought it would ease his mind and distract him if he walked around in the grass and waved his metal detector around. He was never really expecting to find anything. He'd already had the metal detector for 6 months and had yet to come across anything interesting. It was more or less just a way to waste time. And then suddenly, it wasn't. The metal detector started beeping. Charlie got down on his knees and dug around in the dirt, carving a hole up to his elbow. And then he found something amazing. A pendant shaped like a heart and attached to a sparkling gold chain. Charlie told reporters he was so excited by the unexpected find, he screamed like a schoolgirl. This was no ordinary pendant. As Charlie soon learned, it's over 500 years old. The pendant also features the symbols of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. The pendant chain was crafted from 24-karat gold. Its authenticity was verified by the British Museum, with scientist Rachel King saying the pendant may have been a prize for a jousting tournament. It could have been handed out personally by King Henry himself. Have you ever used a metal detector? If so, did you find anything? Let me know in the comments. The Valley of the Thracian Kings. In World War II, Bulgarian troops were digging trenches to defend themselves against the incoming Soviets. As they were busy preparing their trenches, they accidentally uncovered the very first tomb from what would come to be known as the Valley of the Thracian Kings. The discovery was made near the Bulgarian city of Kazanlak. In World War II, Bulgaria made the choice of siding with Nazi Germany, and as the war was coming to an end, they found themselves being bombed by the Allies and invaded by the Russians. The Soviets came from the east, and so that was where huge trenches and fortifications were built to fend off the Red Menace. 2,500 years prior, Bulgaria was known as Thrace. It was a region ruled by mighty tribal kingdoms who in the 4th century BC came together as a single power. But compared to other civilizations around them, the Thracians weren't quite so advanced. They left no written records of themselves behind, so all we know of them comes from Greek and Roman historians. Homer wrote in the Odyssey that Thracians were mighty warriors who had an obsession with gold and fine horses. Nothing wrong with that. Back to World War II, the trench diggers found themselves staring into the opening of the Kazanlak tomb. This was the eternal resting place of a man and woman who lived in the 3rd century BC. Years later, when archaeologists were able to return and do proper investigations, they guessed the remains belonged to Prince Roygos and his wife. Further excavations revealed even more tombs. This was the Thracian version of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, with over 300 mounds discovered since the 1990s, plus 14 primary tombs holding the remains of Thracian rulers. Lost Christian settlement. Russian archaeologists were called in to deal with a shocking discovery during the construction of a highway. Workers were busy building the new Moscow-Kazan highway when they uncovered the remains of a medieval settlement and a Christian cemetery. When the archaeologists got there, they dug up 46 graves during their excavations. One of the graves contained an embroidered image of Jesus Christ and John the Baptist. The woman who had owned the embroidery was about 16 when she died. We don't know what year she passed away, but it was upwards of at least 5 centuries ago. In Russia during the Middle Ages, a dais was a traditional representation of Jesus Christ, typically paired with Mary and John the Baptist. The embroidered fabric found in the young girl's grave was likely a headdress made from very expensive silk samite. Only a few other examples of such works of Eastern Orthodox art have been found, all of them in medieval burial grounds across Russia. We don't know much more about the discovery. The medieval settlement was obviously abandoned and then fell into ruin. It has no name or historical records. The burial ground was also forgotten, only found because construction workers had to dig up the ground for the new road. One muddy shoe. A mudlarker is a person who explores the muddy banks of rivers looking for treasure. Specifically, the term became popular in medieval London because people would crawl through the muck of the River Thames looking for lost goods. People still do it today, and one of them found something shocking. The man was wandering along a riverbank in Kent when he discovered what appears to be the oldest shoe ever found in the UK. Carbon dating has placed the artifact at 3,000 years old. The shoe, randomly found on the riverbank, was manufactured around 888 BC. It was a toddler's shoe. Steve Tomlinson, a local resident, was the one who came across the shoe, and it's true that he was purposely searching for goods. Yet nothing could have prepared him for finding such an ancient piece of footwear. It's a surprise he noticed it at all, because it looked like an old piece of garbage smushed into the riverbank. But Steve has a keen eye, and he recognized the weathered leather of an old shoe. He originally thought it was medieval, but now it looks like it belonged to a child from the Bronze Age. Thanks for watching! What do you think was the most impressive accidental archaeological discovery?
The mystical Stargate of Ur. The American invasion of Iraq may have, according to a very exciting conspiracy theory, had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. Instead, the Americans may have wanted to get their hands on something that turned up during the excavation of a pyramid in 1922. I'm talking about a Stargate, a portal that can transport a human being to another realm. But does it exist? And did the Americans manage to get their hands on it? Let's start with its discovery, or rather its alleged discovery in 1922. If that year sounds familiar, it's because 1922 was when Howard Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb. While Carter was getting famous, another archaeologist by the name of Charles Leonard Woolley was hard at work in Iraq. Charles, partly sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania, excavated the ancient city of Ur. He focused his attention on a megalithic temple complex at the heart of the ruined metropolis. It was a pyramid unlike anything the world was used to seeing. It wasn't smooth like the ones in Egypt, it was terraced with a series of huge steps. The remains of the pyramid, known as a ziggurat, were initially found 70 years earlier by William Loftus. William had found the inscriptions dating the ziggurat to the reign of King Nabonidus of the 6th century BC, but it was Charles who uncovered the older layers and dug into the core of the ziggurat. He found mud bricks over 4,000 years old, dating to the reign of Ur-Nammu. This proved that the ziggurat was nearly as old as the Great Pyramid of Giza. In 1923, Charles found a trench near the ruins of the ziggurat. Over the next 3 years, he and his workers uncovered burials so resplendent with riches and treasure that many of them were even more impressive than the tomb of King Tut. But the world just didn't care as much about Mesopotamia. Everybody was obsessed with Egypt, which meant the opulent tombs of Ur were left largely shunned. Plus, Charles didn't want to tell anyone anyway. He was incredibly secretive about his discoveries. He would send telegrams in Latin. That way, nobody except his colleagues would understand them. By 1934, Charles Woolley had discovered over 850 tombs in the Mesopotamian city of Ur. They dated from about 4,600 years ago to 4,000 years ago. But did he also find a Stargate during his investigations? I would love to believe that, but there has to be proof. According to Michael Sala, an Australian expert in all things extraterrestrial, the US invaded Iraq in 2003 because there is a Stargate buried underneath the ziggurat, the pyramid excavated by Charles almost a century ago. But what is his proof? I don't really know. Do you think it's true? Let me know in the comments. The Library of Ashurbanipal. If you think the Library of Alexandria was old, wait until you hear this. I'm going to take you inside the oldest known systematically organized library on the planet. By systematically organized, I mean this was the oldest library that cataloged its books. It was established by King Ashurbanipal of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 7th century BC. If you love books and organization, you're going to love this. Even 3,700 years ago, kings and queens were interested in preserving the history and culture of their civilization. You have to remember that even when the pyramids were built, the pyramid builders had their own ancient history like we do today. They too wondered what stories their ancestors told, what knowledge they lost, and what gods visited them from the sky. King Ashurbanipal wanted to safeguard the wisdom and knowledge of the Mesopotamians for the rest of time. He established his library in the city of Nineveh, and it soon accumulated tens of thousands of texts. There were more books in this ancient library than you can find in most modern libraries. Sadly, I can't give you an exact figure. Nobody knows precisely how many books the library held on its shelves. What I can tell you is that in the middle of the 19th century, archaeologists found the ruins of the library, and it still had 30,000 texts in it. Based solely on that information, experts are pretty sure the original library had over 100,000 texts, though it could have been substantially larger. And it wasn't even the first one. Literary enthusiasts should be drooling right now because the first libraries in the world were built by the Sumerians around 2,900 BC. That was nearly 6,000 years before today. None of those books are still around, and the libraries have all been destroyed or lost. But scholars know that they did exist at one point in time. Some were private, others were connected to temples, schools, or palaces. What makes Ashurbanipal's library so special is that it was the first one to organize its knowledge in the same way as a modern library would. But it only lasted for a whopping, wait for it, 30 years. Then it was burned when a coalition of Persians and Babylonians attacked Nineveh in 612 BC. The coalition toppled the Neo-Assyrian Empire like a Jenga tower. They burned the library in an attempt to remove all memory of the Assyrians from human history. The pendant of a goddess. Recently, archaeologists were left speechless upon finding a golden pendant from ancient Egypt in a most unexpected place. The pendant depicts one of the greatest Egyptian goddesses ever, but it wasn't found in Egypt. Researchers uncovered it in the ancient Greek city of Pylos. Sharon Stalker was one of the archaeologists on the excavation, digging alongside her husband, Jack Davis. Sharon told ArtNet News that they were surprised to find the pendant. No other depictions of Egyptian deities have ever been found in Pylos from this particular era. Sharon and Jack aren't even sure how it made its way across the Mediterranean Sea. The pendant is ancient, like really, really old. It was found in a tomb from 1500 BC, but the pendant could be even older. It depicts Hathor, a goddess who is easily recognizable because of her cow ears. Hathor isn't just one of my favorite Egyptian deities, she was also one of the most important deities for Egyptians. Hathor was worshipped for longer than Jesus Christ has been dead. That should really put into perspective just how long the religion of ancient Egypt lasted before St. Mark the Evangelist started bringing Christianity to Egypt 2,000 years ago. Hathor was beloved because she was the mother of Horus, god of the sky, and Ra, god of the sun. She was also the goddess of beauty, sensuality, dancing, music, and motherhood. She is unmistakable in ancient Egyptian art because of her headdress of cow horns. In the case of the pendant found in Greece, she had large cow ears. According to scholar Solange Ashby, Hathor was so admired by ancient people that she spread across Egypt and into Nubia. She was worshipped as early as 2300 BC. The incredible pendant was discovered inside a subterranean tomb shaped like a beehive. Sharon and Jack were hoping to find the remains of workshops and houses, but instead came across the burial tomb. The tomb was made during the reign of the Mycenaean civilization. The presence of the pendant suggests there was more of a cultural connection between Egypt and Greece than historians previously thought. And now for a quick break, because it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Crystals4992 and Kids! Hi guys! And to William House 8602 for watching and supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family, because why not? The oldest map in the whole world. You're going to be blown away by the truth behind what might be the oldest map in the world. It predates written language and was discovered in Ukraine in 1966. It's believed to be about 12,000 years old, dating to the days of the biblical flood. This map may have been drawn when Noah was busily wrangling 2 of every animal onto his ark. Perhaps the craziest thing though, and I say crazy in the best way possible, is this. The map was inscribed onto the tusk of a woolly mammoth. How cool is that? Here's a picture of the map. The drawing, which was etched onto the tusk, appears to show some dwellings built alongside a river. It isn't the most detailed map ever made, but then you couldn't really expect it to be. It was drawn in 10,000 BC. It looks like someone tried to make a map of their riverside settlement. Someone as in a cave person wearing a loincloth, maybe even a robe of bear fur. Things are going to get even better when I tell you about the place where the mystery map was found. The archaeological site is called Mezirich. It's not far from the capital of Kiev, where humans lived in mammoth bone huts 15,000 years ago. What I mean by mammoth bone huts is actual huts made using the bones of mammoths. Instead of cutting down trees and building timber cabins, the people of Mezirich scavenged bones of beasts and used them to build their houses. Each dwelling was monumental, around 240 square feet each. It's not much by modern standards, but considering the walls were made from stacked mammoth skulls, femora, scapulae, humeri, and nominatis, it's pretty impressive. It took about 149 mammoths to build 4 oval huts. That's not all. Archaeologists also discovered sewing needles, perforators, polishers, awls, and other tools made from mammoth ivory. And they discovered trace amounts of woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, wolverines, and many more animals. Mezirich was a fully functioning settlement, one that even had a workshop where the mammoths were processed. It was first discovered by a farmer in 1965, shortly before the map was found. Nobody knows if the map is a depiction of Mezirich itself or a different settlement. Would you live in a house made of mammoth bones? Let me know in the comments. Why did the chicken cross the road? What came first, the chicken or the egg? For archaeologists, that is not the right question. Scientists around the globe have been trying to figure out when and where chickens were first domesticated. No animal on this planet is eaten as much as the chicken. But how did it all start? This is the bizarre story of the very first chicken to cross the road. The Silk Road, that is.
Pigs, sheep, and cows were domesticated about 10,000 years ago. Domesticated chickens haven't been around anywhere close to that long. A paper published by scientist Joris Peters in 2022 suggests that domesticated chickens appeared for the first time in prehistoric Thailand. The first domesticated chickens were likely around during the middle of the second millennium BC, with chickens like we know them today appearing around 1650 BC. They didn't show up in Europe until after Jesus had come and gone. But how did it happen? It's believed someone mixed the South Asian jungle fowl with the red jungle fowl. It would have happened slowly, like how wolves were gradually bred to become man's best friend. Jungle fowls were selectively bred until they became man's best snack. There's more to the story though. Small, brittle, and hollow chicken bones appear in Thailand's archaeological record at the exact same time as cultivated rice. Nobody knows precisely what happened. They only know that rice and chickens appeared at the same time, making chicken and rice one of the oldest combos in the world. Joris and his colleagues think that rice may have acted like a magnet, attracting chickens. Spilled rice could have lured chickens into human settlements, leading them straight to us. Maybe they wanted to be eaten. It's a familiar coincidence. Did you know the house mouse appeared inside human settlements right before cat domestication 10,000 years ago? Many scientists think house mice lured small cats into human homes, which led to cats becoming pets. Joris and the team reached their exciting conclusions by studying eggshells found across 12 archaeological sites. They found that by 2,500 years ago, eggshells were suddenly all over the Silk Road. The notion of keeping chickens for their eggs began in prehistoric Thailand, then made its way along the Silk Road to Europe starting around 500 BC. The next time you have some delicious chicken nuggets or a poached egg, thank your Stone Age friends in Thailand. The Fairy Tale Castle. In 2024, so earlier this year, archaeologists revealed the ruins of a mystifying castle that hasn't been seen for 600 years. Archaeologists knew they were going to find something, but hadn't anticipated the incredible preservation of the ruins. The excavation started in February of 2023. Historians already knew that the Château de l'Hermine Hotel in Vannes, constructed in the 18th century, was built on the site of a castle from the Middle Ages. But they weren't sure how much of the castle was left. They soon found out. 10 feet beneath the surface in the courtyard of the hotel, they hit pay dirt. The team of researchers from the French National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research found the stone foundation of a 14th century castle. They believe it was built by the Duke of Brittany to show off his wealth, power, and status. If you want to show off how wealthy you are today, maybe you'll show off your Lambo or your crypto wallet. But in the 1380s, you built a castle. This incredible fortress, straight out of a fairy tale, was originally surrounded by a moat. The only way across the moat was by traversing a small wooden bridge. Archaeologists have already uncovered the stone pier and a few fragments of the bridge. Unfortunately, there have yet to be any cool crocodile skeletons found. The moat likely didn't have any giant reptiles in it, and definitely no sharks. But the castle was surprisingly well equipped for its era. Researchers found indoor toilets with drainage pipes. Here's a picture of what remains of the toilets taken at the excavation site. The true history of the castle is still a bit of a mystery. It was used for roughly 100 years and then abandoned in the 1470s. After that, the castle slowly rotted and became a ruin. Then, in the 18th century, the hotel was built directly on the fortress's ruins. Here's a picture of the excavation site in the courtyard from above. Pretty cool, right? Statues lost in a Tuscan spa. One of Italy's greatest mysteries is how the Etruscan civilization was absorbed by the Romans. But the mystery is slowly being solved thanks to archaeological discoveries found in Tuscany. Discoveries like some statues found in a 2,300-year-old spa. In the 2nd century BC, Tuscany saw great turmoil. From town to town, battles were being fought, allegiances were broken, and new alliances were forged.
The Etruscans had previously controlled the territory, but their neighbors, a pesky bunch of conquerors known as the Romans, were sort of being bullies. The Romans were expanding, beating the Etruscans at every step. Then one day in the 1st century AD, the Etruscans were just sort of gone. They had been absorbed into the Roman Empire. Although historians aren't entirely sure if they were absorbed, crushed like bugs, or marginalized to the point their culture was forgotten. Now, I want to talk about these awesome statues found in the spa. Archaeologists were excavating a thermal bath outside the city of Siena when tiny fragments began to appear in the mud. First there was a hand, then an elbow. Now researchers have pulled 24 amazingly preserved statues out of the muck. Most of them look like they were made yesterday. It's shocking to see how undamaged they are after so many centuries. Jacopo Taboli, the leader of the excavation, said the discovery is the biggest deposit of Etruscan bronze statues in Italy. It might even be the most significant collection of bronze statues ever found in the Mediterranean. But who or what are the statues modeled after? They depict gods that are recognizable even today. The statues are of Apollo and Hygeia and other gods worshipped by the Greeks and the Romans. But what makes them extra interesting is that they still have inscriptions on them. The inscriptions are the names of important Etruscan families. These amazing artifacts show that the Etruscans worshipped the same gods as the Romans. The Romans probably stole the gods of the Etruscans and absorbed them into their culture. As for what the statues were doing lost in a spa, that's a bit tougher to explain. Researchers think the statues may have been drowned in the thermal waters as part of a ritual. They may have been put into the hot spring as offerings to the gods. The spa had remained in use until the 5th century AD, when Christians decided they didn't like people bathing in public. You can thank the Christians for the fact that there are no giant public hot tubs in your city. Where is the Three Brothers pendant? Let's talk about another piece of exceptional jewelry. There is a pendant somewhere in this world that is worth a phenomenal amount of money. Enough money for whoever finds it to live in the lap of luxury for the rest of their days. But nobody knows where it is. And that's the mystery. It vanished in 1645 and hasn't been seen since. It's called the Three Brothers, a pendant made from 3 rectangles, each one set with an invaluable balas ruby. Each rectangular jewel was separated by 3 giant pearls. And the jewel originally had a monstrous pearl dangling from a chain connected to the lowest rectangle. But the centerpiece was what really caught the eye. At the center of the pendant was a blue diamond cut to look like a pyramid, weighing an astounding 30 carats. Here's what experts think the Three Brothers pendant looks like. It's a miniature painting by an unknown artist made around 1500. Who could have worn such a valuable piece of jewelry? You're probably thinking of the royal family from India. But it was a duke, Charles the Bold, the last Duke of Burgundy. He carried the pendant as a good luck charm, but it didn't bring him much luck. After his defeat at the Battle of Grandson in 1476, somebody stole the jewel from his tent. He died the year after. Hey, maybe it was a good luck charm. Whoever stole it condemned the duke to his fate. The jewel found its way to King Henry VIII, then to his successor, King Edward VI in 1551. 3 years later, in 1554, Edward gifted it to his sister Mary I. It was later worn by Queen Elizabeth I, as can be seen here in the portrait of her painted by Sir William Cigar Ermine in 1585. Then, it was gone. Just before the middle of the 17th century, it vanished without a trace, and nobody has a clue as to where it went. Its last known location was in the Netherlands in 1642. It had made its way to Henrietta Maria, who may have pawned it at a bank in Rotterdam, but nobody knows. And so the extremely valuable and historical piece might still be out there somewhere, maybe hidden in somebody's attic. Mysterious rock art in Brazil. A truly remarkable series of rock engravings have been found in Brazil. The country's National Institute of Historic and Artistic Heritage dated the engravings to the 1st century AD. They were identified at 16 sites across the state of Tocantins. Plus, the sites have evidence of human habitation dating back 12,000 years. It's tough to imagine what life was like in the Amazon jungle before civilization really got started. It must have felt like being alive at the dawn of time. although for them it would have just been another day. Scientists don't know much about what was going on at the sites 2,000 years ago, never mind 10,000 years before that. Their only clues are etched onto rock faces. Researchers found artworks depicting footprints, animal tracks, and strange heavenly bodies. It looks as if the ancient jungle dwellers were trying to engrave what they saw when they looked up to the heavens. But that's not the most exciting part. I think the coolest part is that across the 16 sites, researchers identified recurring symbols. This means there must have been a shared belief system. The jungle dwellers, even ones who lived far from one another, shared the same religious beliefs. However, archaeologists are clueless as to what those beliefs were. They could have worshipped a flying spaghetti monster for all we know. There were also some ancient paintings discovered, curious artwork made using red pigments. But the paintings are faded and harder to discern than the engravings. They also appear to be older and may have been made by a different culture. These discoveries prove that, contrary to old beliefs, the Amazon was home to many civilizations in ancient times. The creepy grave. One of the creepiest places in Ireland also happens to be one of the most picturesque. At the top of a hill just east of Bagencop, there is a large mound of grass. But if you look closer, the grass is growing out of the top of an ancient tomb. The Hullbjerg Passage grave has been at the top of this rural landscape for the last 7,000 years. Records from 1875 show that nobody knew about the secret at the top of the hill. The grave was overgrown by thorn bushes and would have been invisible from the bottom of the mound. It wasn't until 1947 that people got suspicious that there was something more than meets the eye. Then, in the 1960s, Langeland's museum began a major excavation project. Workers found the remains of at least 53 humans. But that's only the start. Researchers also discovered objects made of bone, amber, flint, and clay. And they found evidence of ancient dental surgery. If you think going to the dentist today is bad, imagine 7,000 years ago, when tools were made from human bones. Among the 53 human remains discovered, 2 skulls proved more interesting than the rest. One of the skulls had several teeth left, which had holes in them made by what was most likely a flint drill. Scientists used modern scanning equipment to illuminate the marks from a rotating drill. They were so intrigued that the team recreated the procedure using the same tool. From start to finish, the operation would have taken about 5 or 6 minutes using the primitive flint instrument. It was definitely painful. But when it was over, the patient was likely relieved because hopefully their tooth pain was gone. The second interesting skull also had a hole in it, but not in a tooth. Scientists found evidence of a hole drilled above the person's temple, a very early form of trepanation. A Stone Age surgeon drilled a hole in this man or woman's skull to alleviate pressure on their brain, probably after a blow to the head. The passage grave is pretty creepy. It's dark, it's cramped, and it was filled with bodies. But it's amazing because it shows that even before the first city rose from the dust of Mesopotamia, human beings were practicing surgery. How does that even make sense? Viking body modification. Body modification is not a new fad. In fact, many Vikings 1,000 years ago were likely more modified than many hardcore body modders today. What I'm about to tell you could change your whole perception of Vikings. At a cemetery on the small island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea, scientists found the skeletal remains of some Vikings. The skeletons included males who had carved grooves into their teeth, and 3 Norse women who had elongated their skulls. There is a major mystery going on here. The male skeleton with the horizontal grooves in his teeth isn't out of place at all. Vikings were known for modifying their teeth as part of their culture. But the 3 women with extra long skulls have left scientists in shock. Never before have archaeologists found proof that Vikings practiced cranial deformation. Mattias Toplak is a Swedish archaeologist who specializes in Viking burial customs. He and his colleagues recently published their study on the bizarre skulls discovered in Gotland. Mattias believes he might be able to explain the strange heads. In the 10th and 11th centuries, there were many civilizations and cultures who artificially elongated the skulls of their infants. This was likely done to increase social status, or to present themselves as members of a particular ethnic group. However, these are only guesses. Scientists have never been able to 100% confirm why cultures practiced elongation procedures. The one thing that's for sure is that the Vikings did not practice it. They were all about body modifications. They altered their teeth and may have used wood ash to dye their skin dark blue, covering themselves in tattoos. But they didn't warp their skulls. The 3 long skulls belong to 3 women who lived in the last half of the 11th century, near the end of the Viking Age. One of the women was buried with expensive jewelry. The other women were buried with a few scraps, suggesting they weren't rich at all. Matthias's idea is that the 3 women weren't even Vikings. They may have come from Bulgaria, where cranial deformation was hugely popular between the 9th and 11th centuries. They could have arrived in Scandinavia with their skulls already elongated. Either that, or it's possible their parents were merchants. Maybe their parents traveled to southeastern Europe, where they learned about cranial deformation. When they returned to Gotland, they elongated their daughters' skulls. Maybe they were hoping the fad would take off, but considering that no other skeletons like this have been found, it clearly didn't. The mysterious antique artifact. A strange historical mystery is currently unfolding in the small town of Trapp. If you haven't heard of Trapp, don't be alarmed. It's a quaint little town on the eastern shore of Maryland that not many people know about. Inside the town is the Rural Life Museum of Trapp, where the experts are completely stumped. As a local institution, the museum encourages the public to contribute any items they don't mind parting with that have historical significance. It could be anything from a photograph to a piece of farm machinery. In August of 2023, an item turned up at the museum. It was left by an anonymous donor who, by the way, still hasn't taken credit for their donation. But the identity of the donor is only a small piece of the mystery. Nobody can figure out what the donation is. Maybe you can be the detective who saves the day. Here's a picture of the mystery artifact, and the photo is from the Rural Life Museum of Trapp. What do you think? If you know what the object is and what secrets it might hold, be sure to let me know. Experts at the museum don't have the foggiest idea. The object stands about waist high. It's made from some wood scrap and has one movable piece. It looks like it comes from an old settler's farmhouse, but its purpose is a mystery. The museum has been requesting help identifying the object for almost a year. They have had a lot of replies and guesses. Some suggested it was used for baling hay, for leatherwork, or for shucking corn. One person even guessed it was made for turning biscuits into donuts. What do you think it is? The Secret Scepter of Dagobert. The Scepter of Dagobert is one of the most valuable treasures in the world, but nobody knows where it is. If it's ever found, it will fetch a fortune. The scepter was once part of the French crown jewels, most likely the oldest part. It was stored in the Basilica of Saint Denis until 1795, when it vanished, never to be seen again. Researchers believe the artifact belonged to Dagobert I, one of the earliest French kings who ruled in the early part of the 7th century. The king, according to legend, hired master goldsmith Saint Eligius to make the scepter for him. It was crafted from enameled gold and made in 3 separate parts. At the top was a statue of a bird. Underneath that was a carved hand seizing a globe between its fingers. Then there was the rod at the bottom. Dagobert was the last true king of the Merovingian dynasty, which is what makes the scepter so historically fascinating. Dagobert was the eldest son of Clothar II, who ruled the Frankish people starting in 613. Then, when Clothar died in 629, Dagobert assassinated his rivals and quickly took the throne for himself. Although the Merovingians continued to rule France for another century, Dagobert was the last real king. Those who came after him were mostly young boys who sat on the throne just long enough to become teenagers, sire an heir, and then be assassinated. Nobody ever said that being king was easy. The whole line was annihilated by 751, when the Carolingian dynasty took over France. The scepter, wherever it might be, is one of the last surviving pieces of Dagobert's history. It's also one of the last pieces of the Frankish royal bloodline that some say started with Mary Magdalene in the 1st century AD.
Montluc Prison. There is an area in France that has been blurred by Google Maps. When you try to zoom in on this particular spot, it looks poorly pixelated, almost like it's trying to load. Everything around the smudgy area is perfectly visible, but there is a single spot that Google does not want you to see. It took a bit of investigating, but we were able to identify the exact area as being the location for a prison. It's the local prison in the community of Montluçon. But why it's blurred is still a mystery. It's true that there are some places in Europe that ask Google Maps to remove them from the service. Many air bases in places like Greece and the Netherlands prefer to stay off the radar. But it's a little strange to think a French prison is so important that it needs to be censored. Some have speculated it could have something to do with prison escapes. Not being able to see the layout of the prison is definitely a bonus when trying to prevent people from running away. It's also a great way to dissuade people from bringing in illegal contraband using drones. That's been a big problem lately, with drones dropping off drugs to incarcerated inmates. But if they can't look at the place on Google and plan beforehand, they might not bother going through with it? I don't know. But there could be an entirely different reason for the blurring. Montluc prison was used as an internment camp by the Gestapo during World War II. This was a place where officers of the Third Reich tortured and killed people. It was built in 1921, then taken by the Gestapo in 1942. Over 900 prisoners were executed during the war, with the rest being sent to concentration camps throughout Europe. It was liberated in August of 1944 by French resistance fighters, and just 3 years later, it became a civil prison once more, so perhaps it is blurred out of historical respect? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. North Korea. North Korea looks different on Google Maps than anywhere else in the world. The country is notorious as being one of the most secretive places on Earth, desperately trying to cover up pretty much everything, important or not. This extends to the global map service of Google. Sure, you can see North Korea on the map, it's not completely blacked out, but the only details that can be seen are the names of cities and some geographical features like mountains. They love to blur out entire cities. You won't find any road names, and some villages are blurred as to be non-existent. You are also not able to zoom in to get a better look at details. So why is North Korea so concerned about Google Maps spying on them? Some say it's nothing but a lack of access. For example, Google isn't exactly driving their Street View vehicles along rural North Korean roads. Some speculate they are trying to hide information from their enemies, and also the location of their technology and infrastructure, maybe even their food storage and labor camps. Whatever the case, North Korea's secretiveness seems to have no bounds. No matter how curious you are, you won't be able to prowl the streets of the Hermit Nation online. Jeannette Island. Jeannette Island is located in the East Siberian Sea. It's an extremely remote Russian island that was found censored on Google Maps in 2018. Internet users were left baffled over the random island being blacked out like some secret information in a CIA file. Google has also remained silent over why it chooses to obscure what is essentially nothing but a snowy landmass. All we really have are some strange facts and a lot of speculation. There is some confusion over who the territory belongs to. Jeannette Island was founded in 1881 by American Navy officer George E. DeLong. The explorer proclaimed the island part of the United States and named it after his ship, the USS Jeannette. But then, in 1910, the Russian Arctic Ocean Hydrographic Expedition found the island and announced it was part of the Russian Federation. America never really argued against the claim, and so now it's technically part of the Sakha Republic of the Russian Federation. As for why the island was blacked out by Google, that remains unclear. There could be a military base, but it would have to be a significant one for it to be blacked out. When you look at the island on Google Maps, it looks like a blurry thumbprint. The whole thing was pretty much erased, meaning the Russians must be doing something secretive there, right? What do you think is going on Jeannette Island? Tell me in the comments. Nuuk Island. The island of Mururoa in French Polynesia is only half viewable on Google Earth. The left side of the island is totally normal, but the right side is blurred so that you can't see anything. It's a little strange because this seems like a perfectly ordinary tropical island in the middle of nowhere. But if you do some digging, you'll find out some horrifying secrets. Mururoa was used by France between 1966 and 1996 for nuclear testing. An estimated 181 tests were performed over 3 decades. Even more shocking is that some of these tests were allegedly 200 times stronger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. Those are some pretty massive explosions. If that's true, it makes you wonder how the island is even there anymore, since it should have been blasted to pieces. When Greenpeace tested the water, they determined the nuclear test had contaminated the marine environment as far away as Peru and New Zealand. Testing stopped in 1996 at the orders of French President Jacques Chirac. He was quoted on radio saying that the safety of the country and the children has to be assured. So the nuclear testing facilities were dismantled. The island is still guarded by French troops. No one is allowed to visit the place, meaning it's more than likely not that much of a paradise anymore. In 2018, the government told Google to pull all images of sensitive French locations from their site, including prisons and nuclear islands. The House of Horror. If you are taking a trip through the streets of Cleveland, Ohio using Google Maps, you may come across a house that you can't see. 2208 Seymour Avenue is blocked completely by Google. You can't see the house, you can't see the yard, and yet you can see all the houses beside it perfectly fine. No matter how hard you zoom, there is just no way to peek through the windows. The reason Google blocked this seemingly ordinary piece of property is because it was home to a horrifying disaster. Ariel Castro kept 3 women imprisoned in that house for nearly 10 years. Amanda Berry, Gina De Jesus, and Michelle Knight were locked in Castro's home and forced to endure unspeakable horrors. They were kidnapped between 2002 and 2004, and then made a daring escape in 2013. Castro was captured and arrested. He was given life plus 1,000 years in prison, but died a month after his sentencing. His house is so horrible that Google has completely blocked it from view. Big shout out to James D. Jones and Ada Ann Colvin. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and let us know what other videos you would like to see in the comments. Hidden Tibet. A large area in southern Tibet was hidden by Google Maps, leaving many to wonder what was going on. The area is now clear, but there was a long period of time in which it wasn't. In 2021, the whole area was covered by a gray rectangle. It wasn't even blacked out in the normal sense, it was just grayed out. Amidst the tall mountains and deep valleys, there was a big gray box that stuck out like a sore thumb. The area that was blocked is near the small Tibetan town of Muba in Nagari province. So what was the deal behind the censoring of the random area? Nobody's entirely sure. Some have suggested it was the site of a forced labor camp that has since been abandoned, thereby removing any evidence. Tibet is an autonomous region under the control of China, the home of the Dalai Lama. It's in such an isolated part of the world that a lot of what goes on is completely unknown. However, it may have been nothing but a glitch on behalf of Google Maps. It could have been a quality control issue. But then again, there was another place in southern Tibet that was briefly censored according to the ABC. The village of Guwakun was censored by Google Maps, then later cleared up without any kind of explanation. Polish Special Forces. There is a top-secret Special Forces base that was found censored on Google Maps. It's located in southern Poland, a sprawling complex not far from the famous city of Krakow. At first glance, it doesn't even appear to be censored. You can scroll over the area without noticing anything is wrong. But if you pause and try to zoom in, you'll notice the whole complex is pixelated. You can see that there are buildings, but you can't discern any real details. This is because the location is home to the Polish Special Forces Command. It's here where Poland's special forces go through rigorous training to become one of the most efficient fighting forces on the planet. You can't see from above, and you can't see from Street View either. You can travel on the road beside the facility using Google Street View, but there's a massive concrete fence. All that concrete and barbed wire blocks you from seeing anything inside. It's a secret, and probably for good reason. Most military bases, sensitive airports, and important government buildings are obscured from Google. It's just people don't always notice. The fake island. Australian researchers recently undiscovered an island in the middle of the South Pacific. It was the strange case of a fake island tricking them into undertaking a pointless scientific expedition. It all happened when a place called Sandy Island started to appear on maps. It was shown as being northwest of New Caledonia. The island even appeared on Google Maps as a black polygon. But when scientists finally went to explore it, they found nothing but open water. As it turned out, the Phantom Island had been included on local maps for over 100 years. Somehow, human error perpetuated the island's existence even though it never existed at all, and somebody added it onto Google Maps as a big black smudge. The mystery started in 1876. A whaling ship by the name of Velocity mentioned Sandy Island in a report. Then it appeared on a British Admiralty chart in 1908. Expeditions in the 20th century failed to find the island, and it was taken off some charts but left on others. Somehow, the non-existent island managed to creep into the digital database. As physical charts were being converted to their digital formats, Sandy Island was put on digital maps across the world. That's how it ended up on Google Maps. But then, Maria Seton from the University of Sydney and her colleagues went on an expedition to find it, only to finally disprove its existence. It's one of the rare times a team of scientists undiscovered something: the black hole. When a black hole was discovered in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on Google Maps, some people started to panic. Nobody could figure out what the huge dark mass was in the middle of the ocean. It looked like some kind of portal to another dimension, or like Google had blacked out a secret military island. In reality, it was just a bunch of trees. The black hole isn't black at all, it's green. It's an island captured perfectly by Google Earth that's so densely populated with trees that their canopy looks black. If you look very closely, you can clearly see the edges of the island that are sand, and you can see the green edges of the trees. It's only in the center that the dark greenery gets so pushed together that it becomes black enough to look like a black hole. The island is called Vostok Island, 56 acres of uninhabited land. It's owned by the Republic of Kiribati, located 400 miles from the popular tourist destination of Tahiti. The island, although not home to any people, is home to wild-growing Pisonia trees. These trees are famous for growing over 100 feet tall, and growing so close together they create a dense canopy of foliage. The umbrella of leaves here is so thick, the sunlight can barely penetrate. Low-resolution secrets. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. If you try to check out its streets and houses on Google Earth, though, you'll find that everything shows up in extremely poor resolution. It's not only Gaza either, but large portions of Israel and Palestine. The resolution is so low, it's almost impossible to see cars. Gaza City is one of the worst perpetrators, with its resolution even worse than Pyongyang in North Korea. North Korea purposely veils entire cities and removes the names of roads, yet you can see individual people in Pyongyang. That's not the case in Gaza City, where the low resolution obscures anything and everything that could be interesting. The official reason for Gaza being blurry is that the images are old. Google gets its images from a range of various providers, and not all of them supply fresh pictures with high resolutions. What a lot of people don't realize is that entities like Google Earth and Apple Maps use third-party companies for their satellite images. There likely aren't any secrets being hidden on the streets of Gaza. It's just a case of old pictures not being updated. But pretty soon, the whole area should get a refresh for the modern age.
The Jurassic spider. The Mongol Arachne jurassica is an extinct type of giant spider that existed millions of years ago. Only 2 fossilized remains have ever been found of this monstrous spider, and both of them were preserved in ash that was produced when a volcano erupted. The only reason we have evidence of such a terrifying creature is that a couple of them happened to get caught in hot ash, subsequently preserving them for 165 million years. The specimen was first found in 2005 by farmers in Mongolia. At first, scientists thought they were dealing with an ancient species of orb-weaving spider, but further tests revealed the creature to be a net-casting spider. It likely made webs just like modern spiders, but it had a special silk that was more sticky, kind of like Velcro. It's highly probable that it used its giant sticky silk like a fishing net to catch its victims.
The spider wasn't quite as large as the spiders of today, but it was a certifiable giant for the Jurassic period. Its body was only about an inch long, but its front legs had a reach of over 2 inches.
It wasn't a giant tarantula, but still, it was creepy enough to make your skin crawl. Are you scared of spiders? Let me know in the comments. It's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Odin, Jode, and the Wild Tribe, and Jorge del Valle for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family.
Hairy snail. In a chunk of 99-million-year-old amber, scientists discovered a very strange snail. The creature was ancient and covered in tiny bristles, making it look as though it was enveloped in hair. This is the prehistoric equivalent of a woolly snail. Biologists are flabbergasted by the discovery, and they are currently trying to understand how one of the slimiest animals in the world evolved such a seemingly impossible hairstyle. The unusual snail fossil was found in Myanmar, deep in the Hukong Valley. Almost 100 million years ago, it got stuck inside a wad of sap. That sap hardened into amber and preserved the snail perfectly, allowing scientists to look at its stiff hairs all the way down to the center of the swirl on its shell. But although the woolly snail is certainly unusual, it isn't the first time such a thing has been found. There are still several snails alive today that have fuzzy shells. Paleontologist Adrian Jochum from the University of Bern says this is the 6th species of hairy snail found embedded in amber.
It's hard to believe, but there are 5 other snails with fuzzy shells that have been found in globs of hardened sap. With a rate of discovery like that, these things must have been climbing up and down every tree in Asia, or at least every tree in Myanmar, since that's where they've all been found.
But what's the deal with the hair? Scientists aren't entirely sure, but they think it may have had something to do with the transition from a watery environment to life on land. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The giant petrel. 3 million years ago, there was a giant petrel that terrorized the southern hemisphere. A petrel is a bird, a pretty abundant bird that can be found in places like Australia and New Zealand. These days, petrels aren't particularly large or scary, but when scientists found a preserved skull and some fossilized wing bones on New Zealand's North Island, they made a shocking discovery. There was once a massive petrel that was so big, it eviscerated seals with its sharpened, machete-like beak. The fossils were discovered in the Tangaho Formation, a place where scientists have had excellent luck in the past discovering seabird remains. Amateur fossil hunter Alastair Johnson was the first to see the skull in 2017. Researchers took the bones back to their lab and soon identified it as a new species, Macronectes tinnae. The bird had a wingspan of about 5 feet across, which wasn't necessarily giant at the time, but wasn't small by any means either. The biggest difference between the prehistoric petrel and its modern relatives was that it had huge, powerful legs. It was able to easily walk around on land, whereas many ordinary petrels prefer sticking to the skies or diving in the ocean for food. Its strong legs allowed the prehistoric giant petrel to walk up and down the beach searching for carcasses. They were carrion hunters and would eviscerate anything they found on shore with their sharp beaks. Ancient hyenas. There is an ancient species of hyena named Chasmoporthetes, and they were so big and frightening, they'd make their modern-day counterparts look like babies. These creatures were so large and powerful, they'd have made direwolves look like Chihuahua puppies. They had fangs designed for crushing bone. They were easily bigger than wolves, and they were proficient in taking down much larger creatures. Perhaps the biggest surprise, though, is that evidence of the killer hyenas was found in Canada's Yukon Territory. It all started with a group of paleontologists finding a pair of fossilized teeth. This was decades ago, and nobody ever studied them or published anything about them. It was only recently that scientists, including paleontologist Jack Tseng, rediscovered the teeth and decided to analyze them. They were shocked to find that the Chasmoporthetes had migrated all the way to Canada from Mongolia. Some members of this species even made their way into central Mexico. That's an incredible journey. and shows just how freely animals once roamed this planet. These ancient hyenas lived from about 1.4 million to 850,000 years ago. They didn't originate in Africa either, but their ancestors likely appeared in Europe around 20 million years ago. As for how big the hyenas were, scientists aren't completely positive. They were definitely over 5 feet long and were bigger than most wolves and big cats that are around today. The Titanic dragonfly. Long before the days of the dinosaurs, the land was ruled by giant dragonflies. From roughly 317 to 247 million years ago, giant dragonflies were some of the biggest and scariest things on the planet. They originated in the late Carboniferous and went extinct during the late Permian. Scientists call them Meganisoptera and say they most closely resembled our modern dragonflies and damselflies. The very biggest of them all was a creature called Meganeuropsis, which was first found in 1939 and was strictly based on a single wing fossil from Kansas, one that isn't even complete. There is very little evidence these creatures even existed, nothing but a few scraps of their wings left behind. And yet, even with such scant evidence, scientists have been able to make some startling calculations. We know Meganeuropsis ranged between around 18 and 29 inches across. That means these dragonflies may have had wingspans larger than some small birds. 29 inches is almost 3 feet, which is an obscene size for a dragonfly. As hard as it may be to believe, these dragonflies were apex predators. They were carnivores that hunted smaller insects, and they likely didn't have too many predators of their own. As for why they grew so big, scientists are fairly certain that was because of high global oxygen levels. The absurd amount of oxygen allowed land invertebrates to grow to preposterous sizes. Monster shrimp. In southeastern Morocco, a country known for its sandy deserts, scientists found the remains of a prehistoric ocean predator. No ordinary predator either, but a creepy 3-foot-long shrimp. Creepy or delicious, depending on how you look at it. The specimen is currently one of the largest shrimp-like creatures ever found that dominated the seas millions of years before the dinosaurs. The creepy critter belongs to a group of animals called anomalocaridids. It looked a lot like a modern shrimp, but was a transitory animal, an evolutionary offshoot on the same line that ultimately led to modern crustaceans. But this thing was hideous, with all kinds of arms and limbs sprouting from its body like a mutant land octopus, resembling a pile of twisted, melted appendages. Other anomalocaridid fossils have already been discovered, many dating back over 500 million years, and some of them growing 2 feet long. That might sound small, but it would have made these early crustaceans the biggest things on Earth. They lived 500 million years ago, during the time when evolution was just starting to kick off. In a world of worms and sea squirts, these spiky monsters were titans of unimaginable proportions. But if they were titans, the newly found creature in Morocco was their king. The specimen is a foot longer than any other of its kind, meaning it was positively enormous. Derek Briggs, a co-author on the study from Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History, says it would have made enough food to feed an army for a month. It was a giant, and in Derek's own words, it was likely pretty tasty. If these monster shrimp were still around, would you want to taste one? Let us know in the comments. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. The Hallucigenia. The Hallucigenia was a prehistoric creature that lived during the Cambrian explosion 500 million years ago. It would have been in the world's oceans at the same time as the creepy crustacean we just talked about. But the Hallucigenia was more of a crazy worm than a crustacean. It was first discovered by fossil hunter Charles Doolittle Walcott in Canada in 1911. Charles would eventually become a distinguished paleontologist and the head of the Smithsonian Institute for 2 decades. He described the creature he found as an annelid, or a strange prehistoric worm. These creatures still exist today in the form of earthworms and leeches. The Hallucigenia was investigated more by scientists in the 1970s, which is when they described it as bizarre and having dreamlike qualities. In other words, it was a literal nightmare. Even though the creature was described as a worm, it was more like a caterpillar with long, gangly appendages. This thing walked along the bottom of the ocean on legs like wavy stilts. It also may have had tentacles on its back that it used to scavenge for food. If you want a more clear idea of what this thing looked like, just picture a worm with giraffe legs and octopus tentacles growing out of its back. That's essentially what we're dealing with here. The creepy flamingo monster. The Pterodaustro-Gynazui was a type of pterosaur, one that lived about 100 million years ago. It was a creepy flamingo monster, a predator that hunted near the deep lakes of central Argentina. It had a wingspan of 8 feet. It was ugly to look at, and it had a secret hiding in its mouth. Most pterosaurs only had a few teeth that they could use to stab prey. Either that, or they were completely toothless. There were over 150 different species of pterosaur, and many of them had unique ways of eating, but none were as unique as the creepy flamingo monster, who had roughly 1,000 sharp teeth hiding inside of its bill. Not only were its teeth long, but they were also pointed like sewing needles. It had a diet that consisted primarily of small crustaceans, mainly brine shrimp that it slurped out of the water and then trapped in its teeth like jail bars. If the prehistoric reptile bird really did have a primary diet of brine shrimp, there is a good chance the pterosaur was pink like modern flamingos. Some people aren't aware that flamingos don't get their pink color naturally. It's picked up from what they eat. The brine shrimp that flamingos consume dine on a steady supply of algae, which releases organic pigments when swallowed by flamingos. What all of this means is that the weird Pterodaustro was pink like a flamingo and was as terrifying as any other flying reptile of the dinosaur age. The biggest bug ever.
Scientists believe they have just confirmed the biggest bug that ever existed. A fossil was discovered in 2018 of a millipede that some researchers have claimed was as big as a car. A creepy, crawly millipede once grew so big that people could have strapped a harness onto it and ridden it like a horse.
The discovery came in the form of a piece of the giant invertebrate, when a section of the creature that was almost 3 feet long was found in a block of sandstone in England. It was the third fossil ever discovered belonging to the prehistoric bug, which is called the Arthropleura. Even though 2 other fossils were already found in Germany, this one was the biggest and the oldest. Scientists were able to use the 3 fossils to reveal some rather disturbing information about the creature. It lived 326 million years ago and grew to be about 9 feet long. Amazingly, it weighed over 110 pounds. Scientists say the millipede likely only lived in specific areas near the equator. Even though its remains were found in Great Britain, it's important to keep in mind that land masses have moved a lot since the giant millipede was around. Great Britain once straddled the equator long before it floated up to Europe. According to the lead author of this study, Neil Davies, nobody knows why these insects grew to such immense proportions. It could have had something to do with its diet, or perhaps it was the excess oxygen in the air. There's just no way of knowing. The millipede lived for about 45 million years and then went extinct, likely alongside other giant bugs that briefly ruled the planet. The Triassic weirdo. What happens when you mix a gorilla and a penguin? Scientists recently found out the answer by complete accident. They discovered a new species of penguin that was about the same size as a gorilla that lived 57 million years ago. They've dubbed the animal Kumimanu fortissei and say the creatures once ruled the shorelines of New Zealand. The discovery came as a massive surprise. Researchers found the fossilized remains stuck in a boulder sitting on the beach. The fossils proved to belong to the biggest penguin currently known to science, according to paleontologist Daniel Ksepka from the Bruce Museum in Connecticut. Based on an analysis of the skeleton, researchers found that the penguin weighed roughly 340 pounds. That's extremely impressive for a flightless bird that spent its days diving, swimming, and looking for fish. The giant penguin may not have been as adorable as some of its modern counterparts. Seeing as it was the size of a gorilla, it was likely more frightening than anything. It was a monstrous bird, one that needed to eat a significant number of fish just to avoid starvation. Thanks for watching! Which of these weird prehistoric monsters did you like learning about the most? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and come back soon. Bye!